Good morning, everybody, and thanks for dialing into the Graphics Generator webinar. This is Jen McNatt from Southern Region. And what we wanted to do with the increased need for graphics, both for social media and for DSS-related briefings, we wanted to have kind of a cross-regional effort on highlighting two big tools that folks can use for generating graphics for both of these. We're going to start off with Brian Walliwender from Central Region Headquarters to talk about the Briefing Image Creator. So take it away, Brian.
Hi, everyone. Just quick check, just making sure everybody can see my screen. I should have the Briefing Image Creator up on the screen. Yep. All right, great. Okay, so the Briefing Image Generator, I'm trying to think, maybe a year and a half, 2 years old. I can't remember exactly when we first started working on it. It's a project that Derek and DeRoche and I have worked on over the last while. Basically, what we do is we pull in data from NDFD, from SPC, we pull a little Ridge2 data, and we pull data from WPC. And we make that available so you can make a custom image on the fly for any location, any area. You can choose which map background you want, the whole thing. One of the biggest questions we get is regarding the timeliness of the NDFD data. Basically, we pull the NDFD data once an hour. In talking to Dave Ruth and watching, the NDFD data posts to the central server typically between 50 and 55 pass, depending on the element. From what Dave Ruth told me, any WFO that has sent their data by the cutoff time of 45 minutes past the hour, those will be mosaicked together into the image or into the files that are sent out to the central server. One of the problems we used to have in the past is there was two different flavors of the NDFD. There was the operational, which was 5 kilometer, and then there was the experimental, which was 2.5 kilometer. The 2.5 kilometer data, they would actually hold, even though it was produced by 50 after, they would actually hold and not distribute that until about 15 past the hour. And from what Dave Ruth told me is basically they did that just to keep from overwhelming the talk with too much traffic. Well, now the 2.5 kilometer is the operational data, and so now that's what's available and what starts posting between 50 and 55 minutes past the hour. We often get reports of, data from WFOs not making it in, and so I talked to Jeff Zolwanger over at the Train Center at quite a bit of depth about this. And one of the things that Jeff commented about is there's two ways that an office can send their data up to NDFD. One is to actually fire off a direct send from your server, which will take whatever data is changed and then sends it up to NDFD. The other way is the automatic send, where there's actually a cron job in the background that runs periodically and sends whatever's changed up to NDFD. And that's actually randomized each hour, so it runs at different times, and everybody's sending data up to NDFD at the same time. And because of that randomization and depending on when people publish, you could actually see cases where you've saved your data and made it official, and you may see a lag of up to 2 hours before that data is available. So if you're seeing lag in getting your data to NDFD, that's something I check into on how you're sending it. If you're sending it directly and you're still seeing lag, I'd certainly recommend opening up a ticket with the NCF on that, because that's something that should be monitored. But so anyways, that's just kind of talk a little bit about the timeliness issues with NDFD. But just to give an example, and I'll try to go slow here because I know it's a little slow for the screen to refresh. Basically, with the image generator, we have product categories, so you can pick any product category you want. So if I was going to pick, let's say, snow, since we get the snowstorm out east, then I can pick the type of data set I want. So I'm going to pick the total snowfall. I can choose the image size I want, whether I want 800 or 1200 px. The background I want, which is either the blue marble or the white. One caution about using the blue marble is because of the number of colors in it, it makes the size of the image much larger. So if you want a small file or small file size, you'll want to use the basic. You can pick the overlays you want. So if I want states, and let's say I want cities, I can pick the time zone that I want it referenced in. and then all I do is click on the map and draw the area that I want to show. So in this case, I'm going to show the Northeast. I select Make Image. Now it's in the background, it's generating an image, and once the image is ready, it pops up on the screen down below. So there's the image it just created on the fly. One of the things right here that it creates is this direct link to the image. So let's say I have a certain area and overlays and stuff that I really like, and I want that to show up every single time. I can just use this link, which I'll click on another screen, and it will force it to regenerate, and I can bookmark this link. I can also set this up to, periodically automatically generate. The one thing I'll caution on that is if you set up background jobs to go ahead and hit the server to automatically generate these, just remember the MDFD is only updated once an hour, so don't hit it every 10 minutes asking it for new data because it does put a load on it that's really not necessary. But so this is just one example. We also have the WWA products available. So if I click WWA and show the same area, it'll generate a WWA map for me. Here's the WWA map. And this is live data. This is fed directly off NOAAPort, so as soon as a new hazard comes in, it should be reflected on this map. We custom make a legend, so the legend only shows the hazards that are actually on display on the map, not every hazard effect in the whole country. And then just another example with temperature data. So if I was going to show the current high temperature for today, same thing. I could just change my fields. And there's the high temperature data. In this case, we have sample points associated with the high temperature data. The cities, what we do is the tighter you zoom in, the more cities are available. We have a city editor. We basically have 4 levels of cities, and that defines what zoom levels they show up. We also have some limited support for OCONUS. To show an example where I'm going to do precipitation for Alaska, one of the things I'm struggling with right now for Alaska is the fact that just if somebody tries to draw a map that includes both Alaska and the United States, which is probably not a very common scenario, what projection to use. So in this case, here's an example of the QPF across Alaska. So that's kind of the briefing image generator in a nutshell. One of the biggest requests that we've had lately from offices is, in this case, for the QPF, we either have the individual 6-hour periods or you have the total forecast. But we can't say, I'd like to have the precipitation from 18Z today to 0Z tomorrow. So we began working on a new tool that actually gives us that flexibility. So this tool, what we've done differently is all our data is actually stored in the database, and then it's accumulated on the fly, so it allows us to be much more flexible in what we do. We've also added some HRR data in this case. So what I'll do is change this so it shows. What this shows me right now, too, is I also show what the latest data available to me is. So in this case, we're pulling the GSD-HER, and I know they were doing some more system work out there today, so that's probably why it's only from 12Z. But in this case, it shows me a range of time periods that I have available, so I can pick the particular time period I want available. So in this case, let's say I want to see the 20Z-HER out off the East Coast, or the 19Z-HER, I guess is what I got selected. I can choose whether I want the image to be smooth. So we can either show the raw data or the smooth data. Once again, I can choose the background options. We're going to have an option to let you pick whether or not you want the corporate branding, which would be like a legend and the banners on the top and stuff like that. So if you're clipping this out to put in a weather story, we're also giving you flexibility as far as what the final image size is. So in this case, let's say I want to make a 600px image, and I don't want smoothing, and I just want state. So in this case, once again, I just hit Make Image, and there's my non-smooth image for 600px. I decide I don't like that. I want a smooth image, so I can just go back and change that. And smoothing takes a little bit longer because it's got to actually smooth the image after it creates it. So that'll pop up right there. And so there's a smooth image of the HR reflectivity from 19Z today, from the latest run that we have in the database. We can do the same thing with temperatures. So the latest NDFD data right now, I got a 17Z. So if I want to show temperatures from the East Coast, I can, once again, just select the East Coast. This is going to show the high temperature for today, so if I click on the map, it's going to go ahead and create the temperatures, and I've got the smoothing turned on, so there's my temperatures. We have an optional city and sample point density, so right now I have the density low, so it's only going to show the priority 1 cities. So let's say I want to set that a little higher, so in this case I'm going to set it at high, recreate make image. And there's an increased density, and then if I want super high density, showing all basically cities we have in the database. There's all the available sample points. And these are drawn directly from the database, so it's very easy for us to display sample points for any field that we have in the image. One thing to note about cities and sample points, if I turn my cities on, you're going to see less items show up, and that's because we have the server configured will never overlap a label. So in this case, it doesn't have room to put the city name up here because it run in the other labels, so that's why I left it off. And then finally, just to show an example of actually accumulating snowfall over a set time period. So in this case, now I have a 2-ended slider bar. I can drag it up and let's say, okay, I just want to show the stuff from 0Z tonight to 18Z tomorrow. Go ahead and click Make Image. And it's going to add up those time periods on the fly and pop an image in there, right there. And that's the accumulated snowfall for just that time period, including sample points. So really, that's all I've got to show as far as the demonstration of any questions I can answer.
Hey, Brian, this is Scott in Goodland. I have a couple questions. Could you explain briefly how the actual snowfall and actual QPF or QPE is getting in there? Are you getting that from Ridge 2? Are you getting that from RFC? Where's that coming from?
Okay, so the snowfall in the original briefing image generator, the observed snowfall, that's coming from the product that we're creating here at Central Region. That went through the PD process a couple of years ago. So if I were to make an example of East, and that's just simply inverse distance weighted observation analysis. The rainfall, that is actually coming from the Ridge 2 server. And so that's just the Ridge 2 data that's coming from that ABRFC, where they mosaic all the RC, QPE, and put that together. So those are where those two data sources are coming from.
And are those available every hour, or how frequently are they updated?
The snowfall is updated about every 20 minutes, starting at 12Z and ending at 18Z, so it's going to run and pull in the latest obs. The QPE is updated every hour, round the clock.
Okay, thanks. And the next question I have, we get some requests, believe it or not, for a national or a regional actual maximum or minimum temperature map. Is there a way we can get that created through this?
Actual temperature map, basically for that we have the RTMA. And so in this case, I'll show the RTMA temperatures. So basically, here's the RTMA temperatures for the Northeast for the latest run we've got in the database, which it should be. We're past the top of the hour, so this should be the latest RTMA run, so 11 a.m. Eastern Time. That's your observed temperatures. If we store this in the database, we'll be able to actually make sample points from those. But a caution about those are actually sample points from the RTMA. They're not actually the observed temperature. At that given sample point, they're what the RTMA says is the analysis temperature.
Yeah, I get that. But I'm actually looking for, like the minimum, the overnight minimum and, yesterday's maximum is what I'm looking for, not the current temperature.
We could look at adding that. I don't really want to do an analysis of that because the data's so coarse. But if you were just simply looking for a sample point plot, that's something we could look into doing.
Okay, thank you.
I agree. I think that would be useful to have.
Okay, we'll add that to the list.
Quick question from Minneapolis.
Sure.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could make the precip scale user-defined, because a lot of times we find ourselves only in maybe the 1 to 8 inch or 1 to 6 inch range for snowfall. We'd like to add a little more detail. Would that be possible?
We've avoided doing that because we want consistency for our partners, so they're not looking at different scales for different events. And that was one of the things, actually, some of the feedback I got from FEMA. Actually, they want less delineation, but we want to use consistent scales so we're not bouncing around, so that's why we have one scale and we're set to it. So unfortunately, right now, that's probably not something we're going to pursue.
Brian, this is Bismarck. I think that's a mistake, your decision. We're with Minneapolis on this. It really should be, FEMA is an important customer, but we use this for our weather story, which FEMA uses, but mainly it's for the public. And I don't know that FEMA should be the main consideration. If they go right to this site and can make their own maps, fine. But when a weather office goes to this site to make maps for a weather story, the primary user is not FEMA. And to have a scale of precip up to 16 inches, I think anything above 8 inches is the exception, not the rule. And to have, I know Buffalo, New York happened a few weeks ago, but to have a snowfall up to 40 inches is really the exception and not the rule, and that should be cut off much smaller. The numbers could be larger, easier to see, and again, we have to consider all users, not just one.
No, I appreciate your input, but like I said, the services here is pretty firm that they want consistency among the color curves, and that's something we've heard from numerous outside parties. So I'll certainly bring it back up to Derek and Mike Hudson, but that's something right now that they're pretty firm on.
Yeah, if you would,
I'll chime in from Western Region here. It's pretty common to get 1 to 2 day snowfall totals in the feet in the mountains out here. So for us to have a larger scale is very important out west, especially with the mountains. And we're getting an active period now, expecting 1 to 2, if not more, feet in the Sierra Mountains here in California. So for us to have a small scale, we need the big scales out here.
Hi, this is Ryan and Norman. What we were talking about with the scales is, what about making it just dynamic to the grid? So finding the max of the grid, finding the min of the grid. That way the colors don't change, nothing defined gets changed, but the scale just changes according to the grid. So you have your max and your min of the grid, and that way it's cut off to the grid dynamically.
Once again, that's something we could look at, but that's not the feedback that I got from our services department here. So,
but the scales wouldn't change, though. The colors wouldn't change.
Well, it does, because on one graphic today you might be showing 1 inch as green, and tomorrow you're showing it as blue. So you are kind of changing the colors a little bit. This is something certainly we can bring up with services here, and we can discuss it more. But I know consistency is a very big concern, and that's one of the things that we talked about regionally with Jennifer and with Matt was the desire to use common color curves for all these graphics, regardless of the tool, just so they look the same when you jump from office to office, or at a regional scale versus a local scale versus a national scale. So there's a lot to be said for the consistency in that. And like I said, you
misunderstood what I was saying, though, a little bit. I'm not talking about changing the color curve. I'm just talking about changing the max and min value according to the grid. So the color curve wouldn't change, but you're dynamically changing the scale so it fits to the grid.
Okay, that's something we could talk about. If you want, shoot me an email on that, and Derek and I will be happy to look into it.
All right.
Amy.
Brian, could you address the accessibility as far as where you can access the site and the supported or what support you all have for the site?
Sure. It's right now it's internal only. You've got to be on a government computer. You can't access it from the outside unless you're using a VPN connection. And as far as supportability, we support it 24/7. If you see issues, you're welcome to shoot me an email. Call my cell phone if it's urgent. We're happy to send people out here after hours to deal with our systems. We do have we've really increased the robustness of our infrastructure here now. We have automatic failover. We're going to get a secondary interconnection in here later this winter. So, I feel like the resiliency of our system is pretty good. But if there are problems, we certainly want to know about it, and in real time. That includes, after hours.
This is Amy. Hey, Brian, it's Teresa at North Platte. One of the suggestions would be to include a slider bar. So if you have a certain range for a location for snow amounts, then you could submit what you want versus just a default.
Okay. Shoot me an example of what you think that might look like, and Derek and I can take a look.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, Brian, this is Aberdeen. Is your second version, if I missed that, I apologize, is your second version there with the slider bar with the HER, is that available now, or is that still in development?
It's in development. You're welcome to play with it. I can't guarantee that I won't break it at any time as we're developing on it, but you're welcome to play with it and shoot me feedback. I've just got a few data sets in there for testing, but I plan on kind of ramping that up. I still haven't, the branding part actually, we haven't actually put the branding on because we've been talking about changing what the final look of the graphics looks like. So I'm holding off on that until we kind of settle on it, but you're welcome to play around with it.
Thank you.
Hey, Brian, this is Louisville.
Yeah.
Just a question on the density and identification of which towns show up. Is it possible, because just looking at some of them, I mean, what's up there right now, you don't even have Albany, the state capital, in there, but we just did a little example of our own offline here, and some of the towns that show up when you have fewer on there are not the ones that we necessarily want. I mean, we've got a little town of 10,000 people versus a town of 250,000. And just wondered if we could have some say in the hierarchy of which ones show up and which ones don't.
Sure. Basically, I can explain kind of what we're using for the cities. We took what they use on the NDFD website for the sample points. We pulled that in. And then Derek went in and started classifying cities, so we have them classified as a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4. We have a real simple interface that Derek goes in and changes the classification on those. And he tried to just balance it so, we have certain cities. So if there's one where you want the priority raised, we can certainly do that for you. It's very easy for us to get in there and make that change.
Okay,
hey, this is Amy in Alaska, just kind of following along that with the previous projection that you showed. I think that's, for me, where the greatest confusion was, that you didn't have any cities showing in Connecticut or Rhode Island or the vast majority of New York or Pennsylvania, but yet tiny little Springfield, Vermont, with less than 10,000 people showed up on the map. It's just kind of interesting. You couldn't tell a spatial pattern. You certainly couldn't tell a population density pattern with what showed up on the map and what didn't. And it was the previous QPF image that you showed.
Was it well, some of it, as far as the QPF, are you talking right there? That's using the default cities for that Zoom, and that's just what Derek selected. And like I said, if you've got some changes you'd like to see us make, but those are the ones those are probably all level 2 cities, and that's what Derek selected as a level 2. So we can certainly change those. But that's based on the priority. So in this case, based on that scale, it's using the cities that are marked as level 2. And what we're trying to avoid here is just completely cluttering the map with cities. That's why in the second iteration we actually have the slider bar. But like I said, I do have the caveat that we don't overwrite labels, and when labels start getting really tightly clustered, we'll sometimes get odd prioritization because it's trying to figure out where it can put a label and where it can't, and some of that's going to be dependent on the image size. So like if I were to redraw the same image and I were to make it 1200 px, we'll probably see much different city labeling. So, I mean, a lot of it's an artifact of font size, image size, how many sample points you're trying to do, the whole 9 yards. So in this case, we have more points drawn for this.
Hi, Brian. This is Mike Builder from headquarters in the National Operations Center. It's a great tool, and this is pretty minor request compared to everything else going on. But I noticed this when we were trying to make images for the holiday outlook when we had the big storm out here, and the interstate layer function is helpful, except for when you're dealing with a larger region, like let's say the entire Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, if that's what the map is. They only show the interstate number once for each interstate, and so for instance, I-81, which was at the heart of that's the interstate that got pounded the hardest by the snow and all the mixed precip. I think the 81 was located in like Southwest Virginia, as opposed to like in the thick of it. So it just made it hard to, especially when travel is of a concern, it made it kind of hard to show the continuation of 81 up through New York, because not everybody can visualize the where exactly the interstate goes on a map.
Okay, yeah, we could look at that. I mean, with the interstates, and I can click those on here just so people can see what it looks like. We tried not to label the interstates to death, so we put a pretty big spacing that has to occur before we'll relabel an item. So in this case, it's going to try to label what it can, but once it labels it once, because of the spacing we did, it's not going to put multiple labels on because we wanted to avoid that. But we can tune that setting. So that's just something we'll have to look at. But that's all tunable based on how we did this.
Yeah, and the example you show here, for instance, even with that spacing, and I actually experimented with it, with taking pretty much the only thing I would show were interstates, and the same type of output here. It would still, with few things on the map, it would still have, 87, right there, Albany. It only says 87 once on the entire map, which in the Northeast can be tough because we have so many large interstates that intertwine, intermingle in such a small area compared to the rest of the country. So,
okay, we can look at the density of that. I'll take a note on that.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian, for presenting. It's a great tool. I know we use it a lot, and we're going to move on to the next presenter now. But really appreciate your information and kind of definitely the work you guys have done in the last couple of years on this. It's a great tool for creating graphics, so we really appreciate it. And next, we're going to go to Matt Solomon out in the Western region to talk about a...
All right, thanks so much. So I know quite a few offices out here across the country have used this, but I appreciate the opportunity to share another tool that we feel is pretty valuable and has gotten a lot of great feedback from the forecasters and the operational staff using this. So this is called the SAC Grid Image Maker. It was developed by Darren Van Cleve and Bill Rosh, both from Sacramento. Darren's moved on to the forecast office in Missoula now, but when they were in those two in the worked together in the forecast office in Sacramento to put this smart tool together to use in GFE, and it's using. I'm not going to get into the technical details on here. I just want to keep it pretty high level and just talk about some of the features it has, but. Basically, it allows you to create a GIS-type image off any grid you have in your GFE. And here's on the left-hand side here is when you're on the Smart Tool, this is what comes up before it generates the image. So you'd select your grid and then run the tool that you want the image of. It's got an option for you to change the title of the plot, label the legend. It's got some color table things, so, as we go forward and try to standardize some color table type options, we'll probably kind of go away from these color table options and go to a more standard look and feel like Brian talked about with the image makers. But, you have the option to turn off and on the image, what kind of background you want. Down here in the lower left-hand corner, the normal default setting is to run it over what your GFE domain is, but you have the option to zoom into custom areas that you set in the Smart Tool. And this is what Sacramento had, for example. They highlighted some of their major routes in their forecast area, and even some of the burn scar areas that they've had recently. You can overlay some shape files, and you can kind of decide what sample points that you want on there, and it's defaulted to just the select cities that they set before they started running the tool. And so here's just one example on the right-hand side, just running, showing the peak wind gusts for a certain period of time. And you can see some of the look and feel is a little bit different than what the Central Region has, but we're working together and trying to standardize all that. So no matter what tool you run, it's going to look the same. So I'm just going to go through a few examples, and then before we turn it over to some real-life storm event examples from Atlanta, but here's just a few more examples. Storm total liquid from whatever time period you select. And here's an example of a zoomed-in area looking at snowfall up in the mountains, max winds. And this is a zoomed-in area. This is over one of the burn scar areas, looking at the expected storm total precipitation for potential debris flows. So you can really zoom in and get the area you want. Darren shared this example with me from his work up in Missoula, looking at some of the waves and winds up on Flathead Lake there, up in western Montana. And then here's just a comparison. Here on the left-hand side, here's what's available on NDFD. Again, it's not very pretty looking, and the whole idea here is to create a nice, pretty picture that's easy to read and is appealing for the user and customer. And so here's an example on the right-hand side, basically using these GIS tools to make the picture much more appealing and usable, and also not clipping our CWA borders. Weather doesn't stop at our CWA borders, so we need to provide a nice, consistent picture no matter what CWA you're in. I'm going to stop there. I have another part after this, but I just wanted to kind of introduce the tool and show some examples on what some folks have been using it for. So, any questions on that first part?
So that's in the GFE Smart Tool list that anybody can get?
I'm not. I think there is a version up there. I can provide Jennifer the link to that and some documentation, then she can send that out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But I do want to talk about, as soon as Atlanta's done here, I do want to talk about another kind of an additional step to this on what we're looking at. And I will touch a little bit on the technical aspect, but not a lot of detail.
Well, I got a question for you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Are you using the ISC on, or are you shutting out your neighboring WFO's data when you create these?
So that's one issue with this tool, is you have to be careful on what you select. We've had some cases where, and that's where one disadvantage of this tool is the ISC thing, and you got to make sure you're pulling in your neighbors' grids and so on and so forth, and making sure that we've had some cases where some offices have posted a graphic up on social media, and the neighboring offices' data wasn't quite correct. So you have to be a little bit careful and make sure that the data that you're using is especially from your surrounding areas, is up to date, at least from what they've done. So just play with it. That's one disadvantage of this, and that's one, another advantage to the online tool, because it's using NDFD and what's officially out there. So,
Steve, is this available in A2?
It does work in A2, yes.
Yeah, we're here in Atlanta. We're an A2 site, and we've been running it. So it is available on the SCP. So you can go to the SCP site and you can download the version there.
All right, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Like I said, I'm just going to go over a couple of examples of us using the Sacramento Grid Image Maker tool. We started using the tool probably about a year ago. Myself and the JS Focal Point were kind of scratching our head, hey, how can we, we really wanted to have a way to produce really nice, pretty graphics out of the GFE database. And lo and behold, we find out about this really, really great tool out in the Western region called Sac Grid Image Maker. So we set it up and kind of played around with it, and really, really liked what we saw. When you do install it, currently it is kind of tricky to set up. They do recommend that because of the updated version of Python and some of the external libraries, that they recommend that you do install it on a Red Hat 6 box on the LAN and before you do all your processing. My hope is that once we start getting to everyone on AWIPS 2 is to be able to really make this self-contained to where it runs solely within the AWIPS system. Once we started kind of playing around with it and started producing these graphics, not only for social media, but our graphic cast, but also for our weekly webinars, we were finding out that, the forecasters really, really like this tool. Basically, it's anything that's in your GFE database, you can produce a graphic of it, and it's very, very quick. And not only that, from a forecaster perspective, but also from the public, we were getting a lot of really, really positive, positive feedback on it. Really, really, people were saying these are really, really nice looking graphics. So this is really, really, really cool stuff. So we'll start out. I'm just going to show some examples of some of the graphics that we've been producing. Here's an example of a snowfall forecast. This is pretty much a standard graphic like we would produce. Would have your GFE grid there. We did an overlay of interstates, and then we did sample points, which are pretty configurable within the software. So we defined what we wanted to do and set the sample points there. Here's another example. This is similar. This is using a heat index grid. So again, producing a graphic of the heat index, expected heat index. In addition to stuff that's already there, we can sort of derive things. If it's not necessarily a singular element, but we wanted to say, what's the maximum wind gust over a particular time period, we can create a new max wind gust element and then use a smart tool or procedure, what have you, to generate that graphic. So again, going back to that concept is that if it's in your GFE database, either the forecast database or your ISC, you can create a graphic for it. So this is an example of, say, a max wind gust grid that we generated and then produced this graphic. As you can see, and I think Matt kind of touched about this earlier, but we did decide to do clipping. Initially, when we set this up, we wanted to sort of just clip it to our area. Again, the issues of being careful about your ISC, and at least for our office, we have 6 offices that cover the state of Georgia, in addition to bordering offices of Morristown and Birmingham. All the offices, we span 2 different regions with 2 different grid policies and different time zones. Birmingham's in the central time zone. So collaboration has always been kind of tricky, especially with the, differences in grid policy. So we decided, and that's one of the things that we found out and where we're going to start doing, maybe spending more effort on is really getting that coordination. I'll get into that a little bit later on. So we initially decided to do the clipping, but I think after talking amongst ourselves and other people, I think we may try to back out of that a little bit and maybe go more toward a not clipped route. But again, the option is there. So once we started producing all these WSO scale graphics, we were getting input, especially from GEMA, about producing state scale graphics. And again, that's where ISC kind of comes in. So we looked into producing state scale graphics. For example, this would be an example of a snowfall forecast for the state of Georgia. Like I said, we have control over the sample points. We have control over the overlays. The interstates there is just a polyline shape file that you can, display in the system and what have you. In addition to that, we wanted the ability to put in county names. Again, this was another request from GEMA. They wanted county names. So we added a little tweak to the code to produce the county names, and that is a configurable option from the forecaster. So we had talked about some forecast grids. Well, because, again, going back to the concept, if it's in the GFE database, you can produce a graphic of it. We can also produce graphics of observational grids. For example, this is a storm total rainfall from an event back in March, and this is just basically the RSC MPE grids that we get into our GFE system, and we sum them up, produce a nice, really nice graphic there. We can also do sort of hand analysis, too. This is from our February 13th ICE event. What we did is we wanted to produce a state graphic of the observed ice totals. So we gathered all of the ice totals from not only our office, but our surrounding offices in Columbia, Greenville, and Charleston, South Carolina, and used, I believe it's a tool that was developed in Eastern Region, I forget the name, ER to PNS, that creates a sample set of your observational and then runs a SERP to create a grid. And then we did some tweaks and what have you, and produced a really, really nice preliminary ice total grid. And again, this is a grid that you can create in GFE. So I talked about some forecast elements, and we talked about some observational elements. So this also, again, going back to the concept, it's in GFE, you can do it. Non-standard uses. This is Brian had showed a graphic of the HER reflectivity. Well, we also had looked at that too, and this is actually a reflectivity image from our local WRF EMS system. And basically, again, it's not as straightforward because, again, the grid has to be in the forecast database. So it's just as simple as copying over a particular grid at a particular specified time into your forecast database and then running the tool based on that. So this is a composite reflectivity for, a particular time, and you can produce that. Another thing we're sort of looking at now is, we're producing these forecasts. Now we're looking in the concept of scenarios. Well, again, we can create individual grids. What's our best case scenario? What's our most likely? And what's our worst case scenario? So this opens up that possibility of that, producing graphics from that. We were involved in a statewide exercise, the Winter EX exercise here in the state of Georgia, and that's one of the things that we wanted to present to them is that's one thing that they're interested in. I mean, they don't want, what's the most likely? They want the goalpost, what's the best and what's the worst case scenario. They want that information. So this kind of opens up, being able to produce these kind of graphics on the fly opens up some real possibilities in terms of doing a DSS to our partners. Another thing would be any sort of special, indexes. This is an example graphic of the SHRB index that we can produce and have available and put into our DSS and what have you. And then final slide here, it looks a little bit different from what Matt showed earlier. We did do some tweaking on the tool. Like I said, we are an A2 site, so that's why it looks a little bit different. We added some options to crop to our WFO to the state of Georgia, or no crop, which would be the entire area of the database. We also included an option to include the county names. Again, that's just a simple Python file with the locations of all of our counties. So it's just a simple override. It can be toggled off and on. And another thing that we fairly recently added is at the bottom there, and I know there was some talk a little earlier about that, about the max, min, and contour intervals of the color bars. If you use the automatic color table in the tool, it will basically go on a fixed color table, and that goes into that consistency. But however, you may want to have a situation where you really want to highlight, say, a particular range, and let's just say for temperature, the contour interval is about 5 degrees. Well, maybe you want to make it, show up with different colors every 1 degree or what have you. So we added a little option at the very bottom there to allow the forecaster to go in and set the max and min values in their color bar and then the contour interval. And so if they choose, say, one of the other color tables other than automatic or change, it will produce a much better image in terms of really highlighting, differences in your grid there. So that's something the forecasters had asked for. They wanted that control and that ability to, I understand the need to have a consistent color table, and that's why almost all the time we use the automatic, which is a standard base color table, but the forecasters could see times where they may want to have a little more control over that, and I think this would give them the option. So that's basically all I have. Does anyone have any questions on some of the stuff that we're doing?
So is your version shareable? Have you shared it to the SCP?
I was gonna, like I said, I've just done some of this fairly recently, and I would love to talk to maybe Darren, and I don't know what sort of the future of this tool is. I'd be more than willing to share what I've got as maybe a fork of that tool, but it's like I said, I haven't. Like I said, this is just something I've been playing around with recently. So I'd be definitely open to contributing kind of the tweaks that we did into a baseline code, or if failing that, just creating a fork of Darren's code to have some of our customizations in there.
Yeah, I know. This is Matt. I know Darren would be more than happy to talk with you about that. I think it is important to have at least a somewhat consistent tool out there, not 100 different versions. I know people can. Once you have a tool, you can tweak to whatever you want. But I think, but I think you got to try to have some kind of consistency a little bit. So.
I totally agree. That's just something that's on me. I haven't done that yet. I just haven't approached it.
Yeah, that's no worries at all.
So.
Thank you, Steve. And Matt, I've passed it back to you. That was great. Great examples, Steve.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. And thanks, Steve. And as Steve mentioned, he talked a little bit about the install and having a separate box in your office that you're willing to have Linux 6 on. And so out here when we kind of launched this, we had some offices that wanted to play with it, and they had a box that they're willing to upgrade and upgrade to Linux 6 and some new mapping libraries and new Python libraries and whatnot. But we had some offices that didn't want to do any of that, and so we tried to come up with an option so folks could still run the tool but not have to worry about maintaining anything locally other than the Smart Tool. And so what we did is we set up a server here, or at least part of a server, to be able to run the image-making code on a central server so the local offices don't have to maintain a separate box. The only thing that you have to do is install the Smart Tool. We get a little small, just the grid that you run it on, a small netcdf file sent here. We process the image and it spits it out to a web page that the office can go and download from and then do whatever they need to do with it. So we've started to play around with that, and I think people enjoy not having to maintain something locally, especially as the Linux versions get upgraded, or the Python mapping libraries and stuff get upgraded, and no one has to take care of any of that locally. We can take care of it all from a central server. Here's an example of the image generator page that it gets spit out on. You can sort it by site, select your site at the top, and then it tells you how long it took to create the image, for troubleshooting as well. And then the image previews on the left, you can just click on it, and it shows you the full screen image. But the one downside is that it's only working right now for Western Region, but we are looking for a few offices outside of Western Region to test this with, so you don't have to install or maintain anything locally other than the Smart Tool. So if there are any offices out there that are interested outside of Western Region that are interested in testing this and helping us come up with a common solution that any office can use, and we would process the images here, just shoot me an email, matt.solom@noaa.gov, and we'll start trying to work with you and see what we can come up with. If we can get it to work, then the less and less offices have to maintain stuff locally. So that's kind of the whole goal of both of these projects here, Central Region ImageMaker, and what we're doing here is we want to take any of the maintenance out of your guys' hands and run stuff at a central location. That's all I have. Again, big thanks to Darren and Bill. And also want to give a big shout-out to Chad Kaler and Mark Loffelbein here at Western Region Headquarters who have been working on this hosted solution here and really getting that up and running. And, we do have a technical group email here that will reach all the technical folks for this portion of the project if you have any questions. Or if you're interested, too, you can email this if you're willing to help us out and test something outside of Western Region. That's all I got.
Thanks, Matt. Does anybody have any questions for any of the presenters today? We have a few minutes left for questions.
Hey, Jen, this is Brian in Huntsville.
Sure, go ahead, Brian.
Do you guys at Southern Region Headquarters have any sense of whether one of these solutions would be a preferred or supported solution from the regional perspective?
Well, I think these are just options. With Central Region, the briefing image creator, being supported 24/7, we certainly use that in our briefings a lot here. And then as far as the GFE tool, I know Corey's here too, so he can address that.
Hey, yeah, this is Corey Beaver. We're going to be we've earmarked a server up here just recently. I know Jen's coordinated with Matt a little bit on this already, but the idea here is to begin running one of the distributed processing setups like Matt has set up there at Western Region here at Southern Region as well. And of course, we'll coordinate pretty tightly to keep those two consistent, but that'll help make sure both of those options, one Brian briefed and then the subsequent one that Matt briefed, keep both of those viable and test those pretty well here, both in Southern and then also continue out in Western Region. Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Well, if there's no more questions, thanks everybody for. Go ahead.
Jen, hi, this is Brian Moretsky from Eastern Region. This is thanks for the call. I think a bigger question attached to that previous question is if the regions as a whole want to get together and discuss this further as opposed to having multiple options. And so that's something to think about. Corey, Matt, you, whoever, all the regions. So that's just something to throw out there because there's the Burlington stuff too and other things. So.
Yeah, thanks. And that's something we've definitely been talking about.
So maybe we should get a call on that at some point. Thank you.
Good. And thanks to our presenters, too. Brian up in Central Region and Matt and Steve. Really appreciate the information and the great work you guys have done on the image creators. So thanks, everybody. And if you have questions, let us know.